Born in 1987, almost axed in 2010, and reimagined in 2022, the nearly 4-decade history of Survivor Series has delivered, shall we say, mixed results. The storytelling has been non-existent, the matches are largely forgettable, and the rash decision to host elimination and now War Games matches at the same time every year just because it happens to be November remains an ongoing problem within WWE. But that said, there are some surprising facts to unearth behind the mystique of WWE's Thanksgiving tussle. And no, it was not nearly named that. So join us now as Wrestlelamia looks at one mind-blowing fact from every WWE Survivor Series PLE from 1987 to 2024. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. The 1987 Survivor Series, an entire team inducted. Now, back when WWE cared about the concept of filling a card with only multi-man elimination matches, they bolstered the team's lineups with lowly jobbers, mid-carders, and main eventers alike, resulting in such oddball units as Survivor Series 1987's opening victors comprising, in order of notability, Randy Savage, Ricky Steamboat, Jake Roberts, Jim Duggan, and Brutus Beefcake. Now what's cool is that the 5-man ensemble is also the only alliance from the evening to have all been inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. Steamboat was the first to enter the hall in 2009, Duggan then followed in 2012, Roberts in 2014, Savage in 2015, and then finally Beefcake in 2019. For a chance at adding further history, WWE would have to induct the late Miss Elizabeth, the group's manager, though don't hold your breath on that happening anytime soon. 1988 Survivor Series, an entire team gone. From the highest of the highs to the lowest of the lows, there is almost a poignant tragedy surrounding Andre the Giant's victorious alliance as superheels from the 88 Survivor Series, as the entire team has all tragically passed away. The 8th Wonder of the World died in his sleep in 1993, age 46, Dino Bravo then following suit just 2 months later at the age of 44 after being murdered. Ravishing Rick Rude then joined the list of premature wrestling deaths 6 years later in 1999 at the tender age of just 40 following an accidental overdose, as did the then 44-year-old Mr. Perfect in 2003 after becoming fatally intoxicated with cocaine. Finally, in August 2019, Harley raced Grace Heaven with a flying headbutt after suffering from lung cancer for many years, dying at the age of 76. Sadly, it's not just the wrestlers, as the managers are also gone as well. Bobby Heenan and Frenchie Martin, the group's managers, have also passed away, as Heenan in 2017 at the age of 72, and Martin in 2016 age 69. 1989 Survivor Series. Rest in peace, captains. Although it wasn't as widely reported in real time as it would be today, pro wrestling was in a dark and hollow state in the late 80s and early 90s, becoming intoxicated with substance abuse. This in part is the reason behind a staggering 18 of the 22 combatants that waged war in 1989 Survivor Series having since passed away. That's 81.82%. We're sorry to be so morbid between these 2 years, but 8 of the 10 captains on the card are no longer with us. In order, Rick Rude, the Big Boss Man, Randy Savage, The Ultimate Warrior, Dusty Rhodes, Roddy Piper, Bobby Heenan, and Hulk Hogan all tragically have lost their lives. Rick Rude being the youngest at just 40, while Heenan was the eldest, making it to a respectable 72 years old. 1990 Survivor Series, a heartfelt tragedy. At Survivor Series 1990, the final event to solely comprise the multi-man elimination format, saw a genuine breakthrough moment for emerging babyface Bret Hart. The Hitman was lit up as WWE's next top babyface as he fought 3-on-1 against Ted DiBiase, The Undertaker, and Greg Valentine after becoming the last man standing on Dusty Rhodes' Dream Team, succumbing to eventually the $1 Million Man. Now, had Bret defeated all 3 superstars, it would have been a poignant victory, as just the night before Survivor Series, his older brother Dean Hart had passed away from kidney disease at just 36. Bret would write in his autobiography that he had dedicated the match to Dean and gave as good as a performance he could muster, which was reaffirmed by Roddy Piper on commentary. Whilst the likes of all the boys in the back, including Ted DiBiase, grieved with Bret Hart and offered their condolences, Bret mentioned in his book that the only people who didn't give their condolences were Vince McMahon and Pat Patterson. 1991 Survivor Series. The Undertaker dethrones Bruno Sammartino. Given the longevity of those early-day WWE Championship reigns and the aging main event scene for many decades to come, it was accepted that Bruno Sammartino's record for being the youngest WWE Champion was to stay intact for some time. The living legend had dethroned Buddy Rogers at 27 years and 7 months old. However, come Survivor Series 1991, Sammartino's history was snatched by The Undertaker. In dethroning Hulk Hogan to begin his first, albeit brief, time atop the Empire, Taker became the youngest WWE champion at the age of 26 years and 8 months. Unlike Bruno's 28-year record though, The Undertaker was only the youngest WWE champion for 14 months, as Yokozuna won the title at WrestleMania 9 at age 26 years and 6 months. 1992 Survivor Series, a first time ever on pay-per-view. It'd be easy to note the 92 Survivor Series marked the first WWE pay-per-view not to feature Hulk Hogan or the Ultimate Warrior. The absence of both men was painfully apparent given the dreadfully thin roster at the time. However, a more trivial note from this Survivor Series is that it was the first WWE pay-per-view to end via submission, as Bret Hart retained the WWF Championship against Shawn Michaels using his patented sharpshooter for the deciding tap-out. This, however, didn't start a trend of such high-profile events ending in submission, as the trope remains rare to witness even today, though notable mentions must go to Daniel Bryan at WrestleMania 30 and Kurt Angle at Unforgiven 2001. 1993 Survivor Series, Knights Without Their King. That was supposed to be Jerry Lawler, not Shawn Michaels, leading the Knights into battle against Bret Hart and the family at 1993 Survivor Series, but it was for very good reason that Lawler wasn't a part of it. Lawler, who'd already been scrubbed from the match, pleaded not guilty to charges of statutory rape and sodomy against a 13-year-old girl, as well as harassing a witness in a supposed Louisville, Kentucky altercation. This resulted in the most bizarre on-screen collab between the Heartbreak Kid and the three Knights. The word Knights being a one-night synonym for jobbers Greg Valentine, Barry Horowitz, and the late Jeff Gaylord. They didn't quite look like Knights, but more closely resembled WWE's Executioner character. 1994 Survivor Series, a Green Ranger. A Chuck Norris, legendary actor and titular character of Walker Texas Ranger, was called in by the WWF to enforce The Undertaker and Yokozuna's casket match, headlining the pay-per-view, and he even got his hands dirty by super-kicking Jeff Jarrett. Well, kind of. However, Norris wasn't Vince McMahon's desired choice to be stationed at ringside. He actually wanted David Jason Frank, the iconic Green Power Ranger. This was part of an overreaching plan to have all the Rangers appear on company programming, but after the proposition was rebutted, Vince had to make do with a Texas Ranger instead. 1995 Survivor Series, Spanish announce table RIP. The Dudley Boys hadn't yet popularized the mass breaking at tables, but seeing a wrestler taking a plunge through the wood wasn't anything new to wrestling fans by the time November 95 rolled around. What was new, however, was a wrestler crashing through the Spanish announce desk, a previously prohibited area that became overpopulated once Diesel sent Bret Hart careening through the broadcast booth. Yes, this is the first time the Spanish announce table broke. Such spots have become commonplace, and it even becoming a running joke that the Spanish announce table always breaks first. 1996 Survivor Series, The Dead Man's Tears. Despite his brooding on-screen presentation, The Undertaker has consistently displayed public support for those closest to him, such as the time he adorned a Yokozuna t-shirt on the 2000 Raw episode after the super heavyweight tragically passed away. However, at 1996's Survivor Series, he opted for a more permanent tribute, or at least semi-permanent. Wrestling Mankind, Taker had a temporary teardrop design tattooed on his right cheek. Though this particular ink has connotations with how many lives a person has claimed, for The Undertaker, it served as a tribute for a close friend who passed away. This information was given by Paul Bearer, but he did not know who the close friend was. 1997 Survivor Series, a wrestler quits for a day. Now we could justifiably say the Montreal Screwjob and move on from 97 Survivor Series. That is the biggest mind-blowing fact in the history of the event, let alone this particular one, and it set in motion the biggest boom period the industry has ever seen. What isn't heavily scrutinized, however, is the aftermath for those who weren't directly involved in the infamous moment. The locker room was heated with Bret's brothers-in-law Davey Boy Smith and Jim Neidhart both walking out of the company, while Owen Hart, his younger brother, was attempting to follow suit until Vince McMahon refused to release him from his contract. However, Mick Foley also left, but just for one day. He recalled this time during a 2016 interview with ESPN. I was just upset because I was a friend of Bret Hart's, and more importantly, he's a guy that I respect as a champion and a person, so I walked out and didn't show up the next night for Raw. If I had a car, I would have driven home, but I didn't, so I sat in the hotel room in Montreal. I found out that night that one really is the loneliest number when only one guy sits out. There was a bunch of guys walking about it, but looking around the hotel, I was the only one that ended up sitting out, so I said, I guess it didn't happen. Foley was back on WWE programming by the year's end, continuing to say, "My wife pointed out there was something in my contract that said I would be breaching my contract and couldn't work anywhere in the world for the next 5 years if I just sat home. I came back and I was embraced. It was never held against me. As a matter of fact, I think Mr. McMahon respected it. It just goes to show you should stand up for your beliefs, even if it is for just one day." 1998 Survivor Series, a deadly success. Comprising the show-long Deadly Games tournament to crown a new WWF champion and ending controversially with a rock-fronted Montreal Screwjob ripoff, The 98 Survivor Series didn't just scream peak Attitude Era, but it was financially anyway. 478,000 homes purchased the pay-per-view, almost double what the 97's installment garnered, and over half of what WrestleMania 14 mustered that April. Roughly 12,600 of the eventual 19,322 seats sold were purchased 25 days beforehand, putting several hundreds of thousands of sweet American dollars into Vince McMahon's bank account. This was by fact one of the most successful Survivor Series pay-per-views in history. 1999 Survivor Series. I did it for Taz. Now, if the 98 Survivor Series was the Attitude Era at its storytelling best, then its 99 Ugly Stepsister was the era at its creative worst. And Stone Cold Steve Austin, who was still being advertised for the main event WWF title triple threat, hadn't been cleared to compete more than 2 weeks in advance. Now, Austin was ultimately struck by a car to write him off, with Rikishi being revealed as the driver of the car. Initially, however, it was to be ECW stalwart Taz who took Austin out of competition. Brian Gewirtz, a former creative writer in WWE, recalled the plans on the Ariel Helwani show. I remember at one point, Vince McMahon looked at me and was like, Taz. At one point, it was gonna be Taz. Okay, great, let's make it Taz. Then, for whatever reason, the next week, it's someone different. I wouldn't call that necessarily a success. Taz instead debuted at the Royal Rumble 2 months later, choking out Kurt Angle before he was relegated to lower card hardcore division. 2000 Survivor Series, a historic night for women's wrestling. Although blood was a natural bedfellow for WWE's male roster during the Attitude Era, it wasn't typically found floating around women's matches at the time. They emphasized the hair pulling and they slapped each other around, but blood was nowhere to be found until this year's Survivor Series. In fact, Lita became the first woman to bleed on WWE television at this event. Challenging Ivory for the Women's Championship, Lita was left doused in the red stuff after taking a particularly snug forearm from the future Hall of Famer, which required 2 stitches to close up. Though not a planned piece of history, it remains historic nonetheless. 2001 Survivor Series, 10% McMahon. The big blow-off to the Invasion storyline went down at the 2001 Survivor Series, as Team WWF, that being The Rock, Undertaker, Kane, Chris Jericho and The Big Show, battled Team Alliance, which comprised of Shane McMahon, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Kurt Angle, Booker T and Rob Van Dam. But if Vince McMahon had his way, then the match would have had an extra 5% McMahon in its genes. Yeah, Vince was reported to have been in the original lineup for Team WWF in the place of The Big Show. However, an undisclosed injury being the reported reason for his removal. It was probably for the best. He no doubt would have ended up being the sole survivor somehow. 2002 Survivor Series, War Games, cancelled. Now, by November 2002, WWE hadn't yet created an outright celebrated match stipulation, bar the Royal Rumble match. They needed something fresh, something exciting, and if Triple H had his say, something from WCW. And Chris Jericho's autobiography, he mentioned that the game had petitioned for a War Games match at that year's Survivor Series. For Survivor Series 2002, Vince wanted something big to sell the show. Triple H had been petitioning to do War Games, a match involving 2 rings and 10 wrestlers inside a giant cage. Vince wasn't keen on using the War Games name or concept because it was a WCW invention. That's when the Elimination Chamber was born. The Elimination Chamber match would go down a treat with fans and remains an anticipated night on the WWE calendar. As for War Games, that too is anticipated each November, having been incorporated into NXT in 2017 ahead of a main roster expansion in 2022. 2003 Survivor Series, the reason why The Undertaker was written off. The Survivor Series 2003 wasn't a particularly noteworthy event, its primary highlight being Shawn Michaels' defiant performance in the Team Austin vs Team Bischoff Elimination Chamber match. But in the main event of the Buried Alive match, The Undertaker was written off. It was an inherently odd booking decision, but one which had to be done, as The Undertaker's father Frank had passed away the previous month and he needed the time taken off to be with his mother as a result. In storyline, the Buried Alive stipulation also opened a door that would allow Taker to revert to his dead man persona, revealing his newish look at WrestleMania 20 against his kayfabe brother. 2004 Survivor Series. Hey guys, Broken Orbital Bone here. Although Maven's career had peaked at the 2002 Royal Rumble when he drop-kicked The Undertaker out of the match, Maven enjoyed a brief push in the mid-noughties, which included a 1-week stint as the guest Raw general manager. That was a result of his team's victory here at Survivor Series 2004. However, something went terribly wrong in the match. Paired with Randy Orton, Chris Benoit and Chris Jericho, Maven and friends appended Triple H, Batista, Edge and Snitsky in a traditional elimination match, during which Maven sent Snitsky to the hospital with a broken orbital bone. He was snug with some of his strikes to the 310-pounder, leaving Snitsky coated in a pool of blood. Perhaps that's why he obliterated Maven with a CTE-inducing steel chair shot. 2005 Survivor Series, Punish for Nothing. Now, it is an admittedly out-of-date concept nowadays and likely no longer exists, but Wrestler's Court was a term for what were effectively humiliation rituals designed to gauge how much a newbie wrestler was willing to take. The Undertaker typically resided as the judge, or in other words, the decider of who he fancied bullying that week. CM Punk once described the ordeal as the most insecure small dick energy average white man embarrassment to the wrestling business, which could sound about right. But that year, Matt Hardy was the dead man selected victim following his actions at the end of Survivor Series in 2005. Those actions being that Hardy stood in the ring emotionless when Taker made his grand return. Imagine getting punished for showing no emotion. 2006 Survivor Series, Who the hell is Mike Knox? This year's Survivor Series featured 3 traditional elimination matches, the most memorable of which was Team DX's clean sweep victory over Team Rated RKO. Triple H and Shawn Michaels were joined by CM Punk and Jeff and Matt Hardy for the occasion, while Edge and Randy Orton had Johnny Nitro, Gregory Helms, and Mike Knox on their side. Yeah, you heard that right. Mike Knox? Having Mike Knox in the main event of this show even confused Shawn Michaels, as he didn't even know who he was. Knox was the first to lead the match, doing so after just seconds once Michaels hit sweet chin music. Post-elimination, Shawn questioned who the bearded brute even was, and it wasn't part of the story. Having reportedly sat in on a creative meeting before the event, Shawn legitimately asked who Mike Knox was upon hearing his name being brought up, resulting in it being worked into the match. We'd like to say things got better for Knox after his brush with greatness, but we'd be lying. 2007 Survivor Series, One Night Only. WWE's 2006 relaunch of Extreme Championship Wrestling was almost laughably bad, given how little Vince McMahon cared about reviving the competition. This was evidenced by the ECW Championship rarely being defended on WWE pay-per-views, with 2007 marking only one such occurrence of it being up for grabs on a Survivor Series. This was CM Punk's successful defense against The Miz and John Morrison. Other ECW champions at the time of Survivor Series were The Big Show in 2006, Matt Hardy in 2008, and Christian in 2009, but they all took part in elimination matches, leaving the ECW title without a follow-up Survivor Series billing. 2008 Survivor Series, A Family of Survivors. But there was a little more history that could have been made by the time 2008 Survivor Series arrived, but Cody Rhodes managed to find a record to create. He actually became the first child to have survived the Survivor Series staple after their parent had done so, with Dusty Rhodes surviving the match in 1989. This has actually happened on 4 other occasions since. Cody Rhodes again in 2011, Goldust, also the son of Dusty Rhodes, in 2015, Jey Uso in 2015, who also followed Rikishi's 95 path, and Charlotte Flair in 2016 following Ric Flair's survivals in 1991 and 2006. 2009 Survivor Series, How Low Can WWE Go? In 2025, WWE is struggling to fill venues amidst rapidly soaring ticket prices. The cost to attend an average untelevised live event has more than doubled what it was 2 years ago, while the most expensive tickets to WrestleMania 42 in 2026 will set you back almost $35,000. In 2009, however, WWE was struggling to fill venues despite lowering ticket prices. That year, Survivor Series drew 12,500 fans to Washington, D.C.'s Verizon Center, despite WWE having been selling tickets for just $20. Those were for the cheap seats at the rear of the venue, of course, but still, WWE knew that they were in turbulent waters when a Big 4 pay-per-view was struggling as badly as this. 2010 Survivor Series, The End? WWE almost cancelled Survivor Series for good, as the implications of an apparent lack of interest in last year's Survivor Series were enough for Vince McMahon to put the kibosh on the whole thing. He told investors during a February 2010 call that Survivor Series was done, believing the concept to have become obsolete. It was something that worked many years ago in terms of a creative standpoint, various teams competing. That really is not advantageous, as a consumer now looks at what they actually are buying. It's such a broad Survivor Series, yes, many years ago was one of the original 4 pay-per-views, but it has outlasted its usage, and is one of the things in terms of rebranding this year and going forward, and that will be rebranded. No longer will we have that title, Survivor Series. Imagine if plans had really gone through and they got rid of Survivor Series altogether. 2011 Survivor Series, The Rock and Cena Connection. The only Survivor Series elimination match in 2011 pitted Randy Orton's team of himself, Kofi Kingston, Sheamus, Sin Cara, and Mason Ryan against Wade Barrett's, featuring the bare-knuckle brawler, Cody Rhodes, Dolph Ziggler, Hunico, and Jack Swagger. However, WWE had originally planned a very different lineup, or at the very least planned on having a second elimination bout. As per PW Insider at the time, John Cena and The Rock were due to partake in Survivor Series staple match, though Vince McMahon eventually reneged on the idea, instead pairing together this dream team to combat The Miz and R-Truth. Who exactly was to team with and face Cena and The Rock has never been disclosed. 2012 Survivor Series, The Big Dog Biggie. Now, The Shield arrived at Survivor Series in 2012, and immediately everything changed, including the lineup. Dean Ambrose and Seth Rollins were considered lock-ins for the group, but the enforcer-type role went back and forth before it was decided that Roman Reigns' Triple H's selection would take the spot. However, before the decision was made, CM Punk had reportedly gone to bat for Cassius Ohno, the former Chris hero, while Vince McMahon handpicked Biggie. Pro Wrestling Torch's Wade Keller discussed the Roman Reigns-Biggie debate on the Stone Cold Steve Austin podcast in 2014. But Hunter a year ago was debating Vince McMahon. Hunter was saying, "I like Roman," and Vince was saying, "I like Biggie." I mean, clearly Roman is way ahead of him now, but I mean, not that Vince wasn't keen for Roman, but Vince's big project was Biggie at the moment. Although we didn't have as an impactful a rival as Reigns, Ambrose and Rollins, Biggie was called up to the main roster shortly after Survivor Series, aligning with Dolph Ziggler and AJ Lee. 2013 Survivor Series, A Mole in the Midst. Now, it is often easy to correctly predict who will win a WWE pay-per-view match, but what happens when a mole begins leaking the results to every single match? Notorious Reddit leaker Dolphins1925, who had come under fire throughout the early 2010s for correctly predicting WWE cards from top to bottom, predicted the entirety of 2013 Survivor Series to perfection, the exception being Ryback answering Mark Henry's impromptu open challenge. Given his notoriety at the time, his predictions subsequently resulted in betting odds booming for those he predicted. John Cena, for instance, was given an odds of 321 to 1 in his World Heavyweight Championship conquest versus Del Rio. 2014 Survivor Series, The Hidden Sting. Now, oftentimes the best surprises in pro wrestling are those which are rumored for months. The Icon was long rumored to finally arrive in WWE at the 2014 pay-per-view, but as ever, nothing was official until fans saw the face-painted Stinger in the flesh. To maintain the secrecy of his anticipated arrival, Sting remained stationed in a motorhome in the bowels of St. Louis, Missouri's Scott Trade Center. 2015 Survivor Series, An ISIS Threat. And 1 week removed from the abhorrent attacks in Paris, France in November of 2015, the FBI was forced to step in amid threats of the Islamic State planning a similar attack during WWE Survivor Series event, releasing a statement that read as follows. The FBI is aware of reports of an alleged threat that includes an Atlanta, Georgia venue and event. We will take all threats seriously. We do not have specific or credible information of an attack at this time. We have, however, made the proper notifications as we continue to work closely with our law enforcement and private sector partners to keep our community safe. A WWE 2 issued a statement intending to host the show as normal, which thankfully played out without any such incidents. 2016 Survivor Series, Randy Orton breaks character. The Raw vs SmackDown elimination headliner from 2016 Survivor Series was one of the best in history, with Kevin Owens, Jericho, Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins and Braun Strowman representing the Red Brand, and SmackDown matching their star power with AJ Styles, Dean Ambrose, Randy Orton, Bray Wyatt, and on-screen Blue Brand Commissioner Shane McMahon. Shane in his most natural form was due to be eliminated from the bout as a result of a most risky spot, a coast-to-coast countered spear. Reigns managed to catch Shane mid-air just about, and McMahon was knocked out flat upon impact, with his 3 young children watching on from ringside. However, most fans don't realize that Randy Orton broke kayfabe to console them, informing that their father was going to be okay. 2017 Survivor Series, WWE hindered the Jinder. WWE really went one step further with the reintroduction of the brand warfare concept at Survivor Series 2017 by booking matches between the respective Raw and SmackDown champions. The WWE and Universal Champions would collide, as would the US and Intercontinental Champions and the respective brands' Women's and Tag Team Champions. In 2017 though, Brock Lesnar was unwilling to go through with the originally planned match, where he was to tangle with Jinder Mahal, and as such, Jinder was usurped as WWE Champion by AJ Styles. Current SmackDown head writer Brian Road Dogg James confirmed the long-standing rumors in 2022, but Jinder Mahal during a tour with Inside the Ropes in 2025 stated the opposite.
If you go back and look when I dropped that title, there was no mention Brock refused to work with Jinder. It came out years later. I think it was Dave Meltzer. He said it. Brock refused to work with Jinder. So, man, the thing with a lot of dirt sheets is it's that writer's opinion on things. But they don't say, in my opinion. They just state it like it's a fact, and people run with it as a fact. And at that time, no, I didn't. Honestly, I swear on anything. Nobody told me Brock doesn't want to work you, etc. In fact, Brock shows me nothing but respect. Even to the very end of the time that I was in WWE, if Brock sees me in the locker room, he shows me the utmost respect. Always handshake, hug.
2018 Survivor Series, the self-destruction of Enzo Amore. Now, having been let go from WWE in January of 2018 for failing to disclose a sexual assault allegation made against him, Enzo Amore thought the best protocol to save face was to invade that November Survivor Series, making an absolute fool of himself and be forcefully removed from the building. But why did he do this? Well, per Enzo on Diamond Dallas Page's Snake Pit podcast, he had to carry out the embarrassing invasion to promote his next business venture, a rap concert that he was promoting the night after Survivor Series, which 35 people attended. 2019 Survivor Series, a hated main event. Although it only happened because WWE's main roster was left stranded in Saudi Arabia, the decision to involve NXT in the annual Raw vs SmackDown melodrama was a reminder that Vince McMahon was wrong in 2010. There's life left in the Survivor Series as a concept. McMahon, however, hated the main event outcome. This pitted the Raw, SmackDown and NXT Women's Champions against one another. Becky Lynch, Bayley and Shayna Baszler wrestled a good, not great match, but per the ever-reliable WrestleVotes on X, the then WWE chairman believed the match to be a major disappointment. Shayna was subsequently stripped of all her credibility upon her official main roster debut the following year. 2020 Survivor Series, a clean sweep. A Survivor Series team landing a clean sweep victory wasn't anything exciting or fresh by the 2020 installment, but the year's event still managed to make history with the stipulation. It was actually the first Raw vs SmackDown version of the match to conclude with the entire team still standing. Raw's Braun Strowman, AJ Styles, Matt Riddle, Sheamus, and Keith Lee bested Seth Rollins, Kevin Owens, Jey Uso, Otis, and King Corbin. In keeping with the usual Survivor Series formula, however, the women's Raw vs SmackDown match from that evening concluded in a sole survivor outcome, as Lana won the match for the Red Brand. 2021 Survivor Series, RIP Pay-Per-View. But with a history dating back to 1985 when Vince McMahon unleashed WrestleMania on the world, the term pay-per-view carried a deep-rooted meaning to wrestling fans, a meaning that ended with Survivor Series in 2021. Though the events themselves would carry into 2022, as of that January's Day 1 pay-per-view, WWE were branding their premium shows as precisely that, premium live events. This moniker has remained intact ever since, though much like the case of Twitter and X, many fans still refer to WWE's marquee moments as pay-per-views. 2022 Survivor Series, a 20-year wish come true. Now, having lobbied for the match in 2002, and in a lesser-known fact, again in 2004, Triple H finally got his wish of Survivor Series hosting a War Games match, which coincidentally coincided with his Survivor Series as WWE's head of creative. The match beyond was held twice at Survivor Series 2022, as Bianca Belair, Becky Lynch, Asuka, Alexa Bliss and Mia Yim bested Damage Control, Rhea Ripley and Nikki Cross. While in the main event, the Brawling Brutes, Drew McIntyre and Kevin Owens fell short to the Bloodline. 2023 Survivor Series, it almost never happened. Nothing will ever compare to the deafening reaction handed to CM Punk as he strode into his beloved Chicago, Illinois as a WWE superstar for the first time in almost a decade. Punk emerged at the end of the night after 2 months of hushed rumors following his infamous departure from AEW. However, speaking on No Contest Wrestling, Punk revealed that he only signed his new deal that day, meaning 2023 Survivor Series could have ended without the desired ending.
And they're starting the War Games match, right? So it's literally like, I don't have a deal yet, you know?
We're at the end of the show.
Yeah. So I'm just sitting in there and the lawyers are going back and forth, you know, hammering stuff out. And Triple H walks in and he's just like, if this gets done, you know, we're just going to wait. You know, when the time's right, we're going to bring you in through Gorilla. And I was like, okay, great. So contracts get executed and it's time. And it's literally just like, okay, deep breath.
And the 2024 Survivor Series, a new era. Having predominantly aired on the WWE Network since 2014 and on Peacock in the US since 2021, 2024 marked the final Survivor Series and indeed the final premium live event that would air on the platforms ahead of WWE's move to Netflix in January 2025. Subsequently, Peacock ceased operations as WWE's US programming provider later in 2025, with that year's event due to air on ESPN in the States. But there you have it, folks, one mind-blowing fact from every WWE Survivor Series between 1987 to 2024. Be sure to leave your comments down below, and I'll see you next time with some more wrestling content.